I know you just clicked on the video, but let's start this off with a nice round of applause. Here we go. Put the phone down, put the computer down, start clapping. Let's go. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm here. I hear you out there. All right. Thank you so much. Now you're probably wondering, why are you clapping? Well, it turns out Jaden just tweeted that Iris is coming back. And you might be thinking, Oreo, what the heck's wrong with you? Why are we applauding? Well, you're applauding to me, of course. Didn't I predict that Iris is going to come back? So yeah, maybe I'm a little vain, but I feel like I get a little bit of bragging rights from that. But it's good. It's a relieving feeling to know that my theory is still on the right track. So obviously, if you can tell from the title, today's video is going to be dedicated to making some assumptions, making some, guesses on what we're going to see in the next album. Basically, what Iris is going to be doing, what's even going to be going on. Because if I can predict the theory correctly by saying Iris is coming back, maybe I can predict this album. Who knows? And besides, it's fun to throw around ideas. So I think we're in for a fun video. So I'm glad you're here. Make sure to applaud for me one more time. Thank you. And yeah, we'll be getting into it. We cannot forget tradition. All right. I started this in the last video, so we're gonna continue it now and for the rest of my channel. So basically, my last video, I did a honorary merch of the video, and I showed off another piece I have. So since Iris is basically coming back, I'm able to wear another Iris piece. So as you can see, I got the Iris monochrome tee. I like this one, but I got it a size big, so I don't really wear it very often, but it looks super cool. And yeah, I just wanted to show that off, and now we'll get into the video. So you may be thinking to yourself, Oreo, you might be stretching a little bit just because Jaden tweeted that he has this nauseous feeling that Iris is going to come back. It doesn't truly confirm that the upcoming album will be, Iris related, because everyone thinks that, CTV3 Deluxe was going to come before anything else Iris related. But, I still think CTV3 Deluxe is still possible. He also talked about the photograph video. He said it was fire. So if he is, still pushing out content for CTV3, I wouldn't be surprised if he releases the deluxe. So I think we're in store for potentially 2 quote unquote albums for this year. Assuming following Jaden's release schedule, because he releases something basically like every summer. So potentially we could get some CTV3 Deluxe in these upcoming months, and then this Everything Bad for You in the summer. That's just my idea about the music, and also to prove that I'm confident that Iris will be coming back is because his most recent spotting in paparazzi was him wearing the Tesla Misfit collection, but he was also wearing Iris's coming merch. And if we're considering my theory, Iris's coming the EP was at the end of the timeline, so that's where I cut off the timeline. And then I was like, whatever the future of his music is like, will be added on. So for him to be wearing that, in 2021 compared to when the EP was released in 2019, I believe, kind of shows that potentially he was throwing us off with that EP. That's what I told you guys. He released the EP before Iris, making it seem like a build-up to the album, but then I theorized maybe it's like, something for after the album. So to me personally, I think him wearing that merch not only, obviously hints at Iris coming back, but also hints at the EP being like the most recent events in the timeline. I know it's all confusing with my wording, but I'm just saying basically him wearing the merch suggests that the EP is at the end of the timeline in my mind. It might be a stretch, but I like to believe that. So the biggest talk I've seen in the community about, because people were obviously excited about him basically saying Iris is coming back. So a lot of people were talking about like, oh, what's the color of the album be? Like, because Jaden with Sire did blue and then Iris with pink. So they're thinking, well, what's going to be the new color? So people were kind of throwing around ideas of, 4-letter colors. There was cyan and like noir and but a lot of people have been suggesting gray, and gray spelled Gray, because and people are saying gray, and I would also agree. It's because every other color suggested, for example, cyan, there's a letter used in that color that's already been used before, and I think Jaden doesn't want to repeat letters. That would be kind of confusing. So gray spelled with the A, if he uses that one, that means that there anything of the other letters from the other albums won't mix up each other. And considering my theory and what this album could potentially be about, gray might kind of lay out what the album's about. We think about the colors, and Sire was blue, and that kind of represented his sadness, and like how his sadness was like he kind of compared it to the ocean and stuff like that. That relates to him. And then with pink with Iris, it was about the vision, and obviously his aesthetic was the pink color. And if we apply gray in the same way, you would think like, oh, wouldn't Iris just use pink again? Well, he can't. So if we think about my theory and how the story's going, gray makes sense, because if you think about it, Iris went through this whole drive-by, he died, and then went through this repossession where he's in control of Sire's body. So he's gray because he's now currently back in the living world, but he's numbed by all the horrible things that happened to him. One being heartbroken by Lucy, and then, being killed by her and Wavy Baby, and like, the whole process of him trying to get back into the, the living world when he was a spirit. So I think he becomes a lot less emotional when he's back, because if he shows emotion, he knows it's a sign of weakness, because when he showed emotion to Lucy, his love and care for her, it resulted in, him dying. So I think like I've told some people, I think he's truly going to become a villain in this album, because he was so damaged by people around him that he now I think he'll most likely focus on himself and, not show a lot of emotion. And gray is like a bland color, technically, and it sort of like, it's like a void of color. It's like colorless. So if we align gray with Iris's personality, what we're assuming, it makes sense, because, he's basically just like this blank slate, no emotion, straight-faced. So that's why I think gray would make a lot of sense. But regardless of that thinking, I personally think that the album might not even have a color in it. These color tracks to introduce these characters were only applied in Sire and Iris. In the Sunset tapes, we don't see it. In any other forms of the music, we didn't see it in CTV3. You'd think, Wavy Baby is this new character, quote unquote, so that he would get a color, track, but he didn't. I would assume because Wavy Baby is Sire, so he technically does have that track. But I don't know. I just think every time he makes an album with a character, it doesn't really necessarily have to be a color track, And I know some people talk about the Sunset tapes and how it's lore and like how it's got Siren Iris in it, things like that. And if they truly believe that, then there's no color track in that album. So to them, that would be an example of a Sire, quote unquote, album that doesn't have a color track. So potentially this album might not even have one. And I think that might be appropriate for the album, because if you listen to the lyrics of these color tracks, it's sort of like a layout of the story, sort of like origin and then climax. Talking about how Sire came to be and how Iris was born, things like that. So since we're not introducing a character in this new album, we already know who Iris is. We don't really necessarily have to introduce him. So potentially we might get a color track, and if we do, I would think it'd be gray. But I'm also thinking that we might not even get color tracks at all. So the next segment I want to talk about when, we're making these predictions about the album is, what is Iris going to look like? I think that's something that's also been a popular topic to talk about when we're, hyping up this album. And, you have to take into consideration my theory, obviously, because you're here, you support my theory somehow. So, I'm going to personally apply the theory to, what I believe he's going to look like. So since, Iris has possessed Sire, we're basically on the outside going to be looking at, Sire in the future, basically. not like far future, but maybe like a couple years since we haven't seen him in a while. So what that means is that Jaden will obviously keep the dreads, and I'm happy about that because obviously the dreads are a good look. And considering Sire's look and where we left off, Sire had the chopped dreads and it was bleached, and I basically theorized that he had that look because he was a criminal. It was wavy baby, and he was on the run, so he had to take a new look. So he chopped the dreads, bleached it, to have this new identity, in a way. So if we're saying that time has passed, that means that his hair has grown out, which means the bleach has also grown out. So I'm thinking that Jaden's just going to keep his hair the same. I also think he's not going to dye it again. That's just a personal idea. People think like, oh, is he going to dye it pink? I don't think so. Even though pink dreads will look pretty interesting. Personally, I just don't think it's going to happen, and that's okay. I think the dreads will be there though. As for an outfit, I'm not really sure because it all depends on like how much Jaden puts into the visuals. And also considering if my theory is true. So if my theory is still on the right track when he releases this album, I'm assuming that the first couple of tracks will be, Jaden in Sire's outfit, because if Iris has possessed Sire, he's not just going to magically change clothes as soon as the possession happens. He's going to be the spirit in the body of Sire, in that current state. So I think the first beginning tracks will be sort of Iris in the Sire clothes, and then I'll get into what I think the plot of the album could be later. But I think as time passes, he will go back to his original look. I think it might be mixed up, obviously, because wearing the same clothes is kind of weird. And it would be good to see a new, refreshed Iris look. I think it'd be super interesting. So that's basically all I have for Jaden's look for this album. I also don't think the face tats are going to be a thing, because I don't think Iris would go out of his way to get all the face tats again. I don't know. And he'd be doing it on Sire's body, so what's the point? So yeah, that's basically it. And, this last segment, because it's a short video, because, there's not much to work with, I'm basically going to be talking about a little bit about the plot and what I think could potentially happen in the album. So we'll get into that. So when I get into these predictions about the plot, this is all speculation. This is all just what I think should happen, according to my theory. I know you guys might be curious. We don't like being up in the air about this stuff, and especially since like the story has developed so much. Back when Iris was announced, we were like, oh, what's going to happen? What is this going to be like? But now that we know all the characters, I think it's safer to assume, these upcoming albums and what the plots could potentially be about, since we have all these established characters and like the setting, this and that, and also my theory, which would be a theorized plot. So I think, like I said when I was talking about the look, I think the album's gonna start off with Iris fresh in Sire's body, basically directly after Icon Electric. So he's gonna be in this like Sire look, but we'll know it's Iris, and he's gonna be kind of confused, like what are his next steps? He finally succeeded with the possession, but where's he gonna go? I personally think that he might make his way back into the city, but that'd be the first thought that you would think. It's Iris, he'll just go back to his gang. But I think a lot of issues come up with that idea, because since he's in the body of Sire, Sire's still technically on the run from the police, so he can't just like stroll into the city because he'll be arrested like on the spot. So potentially he might sneak his way into the city. I think he might try to contact some of the gang members to be like, hey, it's me, come help me out, because obviously it'd be dangerous for him to go by himself. And also I think Sire was still in the hills with the Misfits, so Iris got to figure out how to get away from the Misfits and then also back to the gang. And also the gang's going to be kind of like hesitant, like, whoa, you look like Sire, why are you saying that you're Iris all of a sudden? So I think, story wise, I don't think it'll be a part of this, like the music. I just think as for the story, there's going to be a process where Iris will have to prove to the gang that it's him and not Sire. which would be pretty complicated because the gang pretty much hates Sire because he caused Iris's death and caused him all this torment, this and that. So they probably have pretty negative views about Sire. So for this person to look like Sire, but internally it's Iris, for them to approach him, they're gonna be like pretty aggressive and be like, "What are you doing here?" Um, but if you think about a conflict, because we see both in Sire and Iris that there is a conflict. With Sire, it was Lucy leaving him, and Iris, it's Lucy leaving him. So is Lucy gonna leave him again? No, I don't think so, because Lucy obviously is gone. We don't know where she is actually, because Sire was so upset because Lucy said that she had to go, and we don't really know where she ends up. But I assume that she's probably in like Paris or something because she loved traveling. So I don't really think a love interest will be an issue in this album. Obviously, not only because Lucy's gone, but also because Iris, like I said, is gray. He's emotionless, so he knows falling in love is dangerous. So I don't think he's really looking for love. So you got to think, well, the story is continuing. So what could potentially be the plot? And I think the plot could be sort of like this internal struggle with Sire, because sure, Iris was successful with the possession, but Sire is obviously going to want his body back. And we saw throughout the Electric album that he regained his memory. So it's basically, we could basically say at the end of the Electric album that Wavy Baby is restored because his like memories came back. So Wavy Baby's kind of trying to regain his body from Iris in this album, I think. I'm not sure how Jaden's really going to portray that. I don't think, it may be a thing that he doesn't do it at all because my story could be wrong, but who knows. But if he does follow that path, I'm kind of curious if it's going to be like another Irish track featuring Sire. That'd be pretty interesting. I'm not really sure, because this is why I appreciate Jaden. It's because he takes such a creative process in, portraying this story. So I just kind of analyze it. I look it over. I can't really, come up with it myself, but I'm trying to do my best with these predictions, But I am sort of convinced that the album's conflict will be this internal struggle. Sire wants to regain the body, while Iris wants to maintain control, because he wants to stay alive. And like I said, Iris is going to sort of become a villain because he becomes more emotionless. So I really think this album might be a battle of, evil and good, even though I personally think Sire's also a, evil character in some aspects. If we're following like storybook kind of thinking, then technically it's good versus bad. I also sort of think that Lucy will return. Not return like as in a relationship, but I think she might notice what's going on in the city when Iris is back and be like, wait, what's going on? Like, why is Sire running with the gang again? Or why is Sire running with the gang at all? Because it's not his gang. So she might potentially return to sort of confront Sire, quote unquote, even though we know it's Iris in the body. And that might cause, that might be a climax. It might also be, a rising moment of the story. Sort of, Iris has developed this hate for Lucy because of all the things that she did to him. So for Lucy to pop up again, he'll be, angry, but he might still have that soft side for her. So there might be more emotional tracks in the album. I would like to, because emotional Iris is pretty fire. But people are saying that it might be a more aggressive approach or, a more alternative approach to Iris. If we're talking music-wise, I think he's just going to keep doing the same thing he did, because obviously Iris was super successful. And the thing I liked about Iris so much was the versatility. I think with Sire, it was very, a lot more emotional tracks. But with Iris, it was very versatile. We had some hard tracks, we had some emotional tracks. So I think the variety was what made the album really special. And it gave more development to the character, So I think, in my personal opinion, Iris should go for that approach again of being versatile. Even though I know I'm like being hypocritical because I said, oh, he's gray, he's going to be emotionless. I'm expecting more harder tracks, more violent, more aggressive, obviously. But if we're going to assume the story, I'm gonna say Lucy might potentially come back to confront Iris, and that might bring out the soft side again in Iris. So that's a prediction, but I do assume that a lot of these tracks are going to be super aggressive and, a lot of trap and things like that. Skip step dance. We're finally going to get it, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I know this video is pretty, loosely put together, but I know some people are interested in seeing my predictions. Some people are, coming up to me and asking me some questions about it. Just to let you guys know, I'm excited. I think we're all excited. When Jaden releases this stuff or announces it, we all get pretty hyped. And it's good to see Iris coming back, and it's also good to see that my, theory is sort of correct in a way. The only thing that's technically correct with this reveal is that Iris would return. So that feels good, because some people thought that like Iris was dead and was going to stay dead, but I said, no, I think he'll come back. So it's good to see that, my theory is healthy. It's still correct. I still believe everything I said in my series was correct. I think when this comes out, or potentially CTV3, it's going to be pretty risky to see the future of my theory, because it might further prove it, or it might just dissolve it entirely, and then I'll have nothing. That's how it goes when it comes to theories, It's all speculation. It's all a gamble, basically, because you could end up being wrong at the end of the day. CTV3 Deluxe could come out, and that one of the deluxe songs might prove me wrong. You never know. So yeah, obviously you can see this video was kind of loosely put together. No pictures. Obviously, I have nothing to work with. No board once again. But this was just sort of more of a laid back video to kind of talk about predictions, because it's fun to speculate, So let me know if you agree with any of my ideas. Maybe leave it in the comments if you have any ideas of your own. And please don't say anything about Rise. That's going to be my next video. I'm going to talk about Rise, because I hate the concept and it needs to be talked about. So please do not say a word about that idea, that character, quote unquote, because it's never going to happen, and I hate Rise. I don't even know him, and I hate him, because it's just a terrible idea. But it's also a good video idea, so I'll definitely make a video in the near future talking about that concept and why it should never exist. That came off as aggressive, but I want to end it off on a high note, and, thank you guys for the support on the channel. You see the subscriber count slowly growing, and the views on all my videos are growing. I think the first part of my theories kind of getting close to 500 views, which is pretty impressive. I'm probably responsible for like 30 of those views, because I keep checking if there's any like negative comments or anything, because I'm scared of criticism. But I mean, that's still hundreds of people that saw the video on their own, so it's super cool that my theory's kind of expanding. I'm hoping one day that the theories do get to Jaden, but I kind of think that it won't, or if he does see it, he won't say anything on it, because say hypothetically that I'm right, he's not just gonna go to Twitter and be like, oh guys, this dude's right, Orio's right, like the story's over because he solved it, which would be bad, because we don't want him to stop the story or like reveal anything without the story being told entirely. So my theory is just kind of following along. It's kind of trailing behind what Jaden's releasing. So basically, when the story's done, and if I'm still right, then that'll be good. That means my theory was right the whole time, and maybe he'll appreciate me then. But for now, I still want to work up to becoming more known in the community. I know I'm pretty established in the subreddit, and I want to work on gaining more popularity on Instagram. So I want to reach out to other platforms, and I want to be known in the greater spectrum of the Jaden community. So I think that'd be cool, and I think it'd be fun, and I want to get a lot of people on board with my theory, because I put a lot of work into it, and I think it's pretty solid with all the evidence and stuff. So if you guys are here watching, just know you're special. You're here from the beginning. I appreciate all of you, and get ready for me to diss Rise.